Welcome into episode 94 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tachek.
Hey, you know what we haven't talked about in a while? Facebook. What's it been, like a week? It's feeling less like a social network and more like a social disease, and I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but seriously, you think this thing's taken care of, and then all of a sudden, it's not. A new report from the New York Times has us once again thinking we really should get that thing looked at. Facebook makes a big deal about its privacy settings, telling you, the user, to take control of what you share with your friends. But what about information that Facebook shares with its friends? Because yeah, it looks like they may have been doing that Facebook might have been sharing your data, or at the very least making your data accessible to some pretty big business partners. Based on the report from the New York Times, today we're looking at how Facebook reportedly gave away your data, what and whose data was involved, who got the data and why, what is Facebook's response, and finally, a look at some of the implications. Now let's start with a big picture recap of this story and what Facebook is said to have done.
Well, according to a report by the New York Times, Facebook began a series of private data sharing arrangements roughly 10 years ago. These agreements took place between Facebook and numerous other companies, typically creators and manufacturers of hardware devices like phones and tablets. Now, some information has floated around about these arrangements for a while, but until the New York Times report, we had no idea how much info or how many businesses were involved. According to that report, at least 60 companies were receiving personal profile data straight from Facebook. Naturally, this raises fresh privacy concerns, though people have been plenty concerned already based on what happened with Cambridge Analytica, which we talked about in Checklist 81, as well as the continued missteps we covered in episode 85, Facebook Follies. Okay, so what was actually happening here? Facebook says that they began data sharing partnerships to give device makers the ability to provide the Facebook experience and other feature integrations on their devices. To share the data, Facebook created private APIs that allowed special access for the device manufacturers. Now, this is different from the API that Cambridge Analytica and other data harvesting app makers used. That's the public API available to developers, and which is generally more tightly controlled to prevent abuse, or at least that's the idea. This other API was reportedly a private back channel to the developers that sent user information far outside the Facebook ecosystem. Through these channels, devices could receive info that wasn't limited to the user who logged in on the device. The user's friends would have some of their data pulled too. Even if you had your privacy settings locked down as tightly as possible, these third-party companies could still find out some things from your profile.
That actually sounds a lot like the Cambridge Analytica thing those apps like, hey, which Avenger are you? And then you get through it and it's like, do you want to share this information with everybody, or do you want to share your friends' information, or that kind of thing? I mean, it sounds like they were hoovering up your information and then as much information as they could about the people around you. But, I'm skipping ahead. I mean, why don't you guys tell me, like, what data are we talking about and whose data are we talking about?
Well, there's a good chance that if you ever used Facebook or any kind of Facebook integration on a mobile device, then at some point the manufacturer of that device has probably been able to access and handle your data from Facebook. In tests conducted on a BlackBerry device by the New York Times, they discovered that more than 50 different types of personal information were streamed from Facebook to the device in question when using certain non-Facebook apps that have Facebook integration. In this case, it was BlackBerry Hub. Included in the information passed from Facebook to the device could be some of the following: relationship status, political leanings, religion, personal email address, phone number, geographic location, upcoming events on a user's calendar, and even private messages to display notifications. Testing determined that this info was all passed to devices using pretty much the same methods that Facebook apps like Cambridge Analytica's used to gather data. In other words, though Facebook may have differentiated between the two by way of private APIs, in reality, there was no serious difference in the way that the information was handled between the two different applications. Much like the way Cambridge Analytica was able to harvest tens of millions of public profiles by leaping from user to user, device manufacturers get to do the same thing with their private API. Even if you've denied the permission to share your info with third parties, you're not protected. These companies get to see your info too if you're friends with someone whose data ends up being shared. So if your friend uses a Facebook integrated app, for example, it could end up pulling some info from your profile as well. In the New York Times report, one reporter installed BlackBerry Hub on his device. This gathers things such as emails, texts, and Facebook notifications and messages into one place for all communications. Using the app, he logged into his Facebook account while using tools to investigate what data the app grabbed, and the results were pretty shocking. After the initial connection, BlackBerry Hub picked up detailed data like we just described on 556 people, basically the reporter's entire friends list. From these people, the app continued harvesting information from friends of friends, including the unique ID numbers for those accounts. By the time it finished, Hub had scraped data for nearly 300,000 people. 294,258 to be exact. How could any app possibly need that much data to provide something as basic as message integration?
All right, this is going to sound weird because it's going to sound like I'm defending Facebook, and I'm not. But using Hub to see how much information can be gathered is a bit like shooting fish in a barrel, it seems. Because if I understand it, Hub's job is to, well, as you said and what you were just saying, to take as much information as you can and cram it into one place. So instead of going to this app to do this thing and that app to do that thing, I've told it, hey, I want as much information as I can have right here. Now, granted, we didn't realize necessarily how much information it was going to go out and grab, but I mean, aren't you kind of, you're cherry picking at that point, right? I mean, you're kind of choosing the worst example you possibly can to say, look how bad this could be.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't really know exactly how much data some of the other companies were getting from Facebook, what they were doing with it. And this was kind of the worst case scenario example. And I think there's a couple things to keep in mind here. For a lot of these companies and apps and Facebook and everything is their goal is just grab as much data as they can. Who cares if you don't need it right now? You might need it in the future. And that's just the way they operate. And another aspect is this is also kind of a 7 degrees of separation type thing. When you're talking about going from one person to their 556 friends to, suddenly 300,000 people, if it's just the way the code's working is going from a person to their friends to the friends of friends, it's pretty quick to show how far your connections are when you go a couple steps out. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, not to defend Facebook, but in a case like BlackBerry Hub, where it's supposed to gather all this information, that would usually result in a worst case scenario if the code is going to be doing stuff like this. It's not a large leap for the code to suddenly have information on all these people if it's designed to grab data from your friends and friends of friends type thing.
Sometimes it's amazing that servers stay online. Just because,
yes, it is.
I mean, if all you're doing is saying, okay, so follow a link to that and then follow whatever link you can from there and follow whatever link you can from there, how does my phone not grind to a halt as soon as I turn it on? Speaking of my phone and, your phones as well, who is it that got this data? And I guess maybe a more important question, or at least as important, is how did they use the data?
Well, 60 companies have apparently been able to use these APIs for varying lengths of time. The New York Times report didn't list all 60, but there are some big names mixed in among those who did get a mention. Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, Amazon, and BlackBerry all took advantage of these data streams to offer customized experiences on their devices.
Now, we should point out here that Apple says it didn't trade in users' Facebook data. There was a piece that I found from Engadget that had Apple CEO Tim Cook telling NPR, What we did was we integrated the ability to share in the operating system, make it simple to share a photo and that sort of thing. So it's a convenience for the user. We weren't in the data business. We've never been in the data business.
Right. Apple says they use this information to enable features like posting photos without opening the Facebook app and other basic integration features, but that they no longer have access to the information as of September 2017. Samsung, Amazon, and Microsoft all declined to comment for the New York Times. Facebook itself says the functions were meant to enable viewing messages, including like buttons on content outside of Facebook and other low-level functions. But again, how come that means a device needs to touch data from 300,000 users? Some of these companies were even allowed to store this information on their servers. Facebook says a strict agreement governed such an arrangement, but how much of a guarantee is that? We've already seen that they haven't enforced prior agreements very vigorously until they've been caught. And either way, it means your personal information is leaving Facebook servers without your permission.
It's interesting, actually, to say that they haven't enforced it vigorously. I mean, this goes back to a lot of what we had heard around Cambridge Analytica, right? Like Cambridge Analytica had all this information and Facebook said, hey, get rid of all that information. And Cambridge Analytica said, okay. Right. And we don't actually know whether they did or not. I mean, to say they didn't enforce it vigorously, they'd actually have to have somebody in all of these places, I would think. I mean, so Facebook, in that case, Facebook said, look, we shared the information. We realized we shouldn't have shared the information. We told them to stop. And, I guess they think that, absolves them somehow. What are they saying this time?
As you might expect, Facebook doesn't see anything wrong with what it did and has vigorously defended itself since the New York Times story came out by claiming that the entire process was above board. I mean, we didn't really expect them to say anything else, did we? After the Cambridge Analytica scandal erupted, Facebook pointed out that they had cut off access to user information through the methods used. Well, Facebook has theoretically killed the kind of data harvesting done by Cambridge Analytica. The site never changed the rules for device manufacturers, which is why this could still be happening today. The way Facebook sees it, companies like Apple and Samsung aren't outsiders. Rather, they're part of the Facebook experience, sort of an extension of Facebook's own service. To them, it's okay to share information because, in Facebook's opinion, it's practically like sharing the same info internally. Facebook also says it exercised strict control over this information and the companies that used it, though with so many stumbles in recent years, some might find that debatable. Up until the New York Times investigation, Facebook had said very little about such arrangements. The only clear mention was in recent documents submitted to German regulators. However, BlackBerry was the only partner they named, and they didn't say how the system worked. Some people inside Facebook had a problem with all of this. Former engineers said that when these arrangements began, Facebook employees raised concerns. They considered it an abuse of user privacy and a violation of the expectation that Facebook wouldn't share your info if you said no. And they were shocked to discover that it was still ongoing.
I gotta say, this is weird because I find myself not exactly defending Facebook, but thinking I'm okay with some of this. And I'll tell you why. It's because I use an iPhone. And I'm thinking 10 years ago, if I had been, a devotee of the Crackberry, I'd probably be fine with that too, because BlackBerry at the time was built very much on privacy and security. That's why so many businesses used it, right? And then today, I believe Apple. And I don't think I believe them blindly. I don't think I believe them just because they said. I think it's been years of them coming out and saying, wow, this seems weird. Wow, this seems wrong. And these are the kind of things we're not going to do. Where this would worry me a bit more, since we don't know the names of those 60 companies, honestly, I don't think Apple would try to do anything bad with my data. As much as I'm not a fan of Samsung, I don't know that Samsung would try to do anything bad with my data. Was Huawei one of these companies? Was ZTE one of these companies? Are there like gray box companies whose names we wouldn't even know if you said them out loud to us that were also part of these? I worry about I worry about companies that operate behind the Great Firewall. I worry about companies that do trade in our information. Also, the same companies that tend to not necessarily update, with the latest security patches as quickly, which we've talked about in past episodes. I mean,
No, I mean, a few episodes ago, we did a story on what data Apple has on you. Mm-hmm. And a reporter had requested his info from Apple. And I don't know if at the time of this recording, if Apple's set that system up yet for automatic requests. But at the time he had to manually request it. They sent him his data, and it was like nothing. I mean, it was something. There was info in there that Apple had on him, but one thing that was not there was all this data that Apple apparently had access to from Facebook. Mm-hmm. So that means that Apple wasn't doing anything with it.
Or it's on a different server somewhere.
Well, but if it was the case where some of these companies did have this information, either Apple's lying and saying what data they had, which I don't think they're doing, or they're telling the truth in that they respect user privacy, which I think they have proven that they do respect it and that they don't care about that data. And yes, it costs them. Technically, when you have user data, you can sell stuff. You can sell ads. You can make a lot of money. Apple chooses not to do that. They make their money through hardware and through a software ecosystem that basically values the user privacy. And obviously that does work because they're still, I believe, the number one company in the world.
Right.
They're doing something right. They're doing something right. And a lot of companies choose to go the other route where they want to make money by brokering information. So yeah, I'm okay with the fact that Apple had this because I don't think they're going to do anything with it. But again, we don't know what other companies had it. It might be companies that aren't as trustworthy.
Right. I mean, it's not Apple's responsibility to tell us what kind of information they could have gathered on us if they wanted it. The responsibility that Apple has taken is, here's the information that we keep on you. And the answer, compared to a lot of other companies, it turns out to be not much.
Yeah, it's a lot more minimal.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, but let's go back to the story at hand. What are the legal implications here? I mean, what kind of trouble is who looking at?
Well, in his testimony to Congress, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said the following: "Every piece of content that you share on Facebook, you own. You have complete control over who sees it and how you share it." That just doesn't seem to be the case, though. Some politicians are calling for new investigations into Facebook based on the New York Times story. But that's not all. The FTC might want to have a word with them, too. Facebook has been operating under a decision made by the FTC in 2011 that governs the way it shares user info. In the 2011 decision, the FTC said Facebook could not override a user's privacy settings to share information with outside parties without obtaining the explicit permission of the user. The situation back then was much the same. The decision came after complaints were brought that Facebook allowed apps to access the information of a user's friends even when they'd said no in the settings. Again, Facebook says there's no foul here. These service providers aren't true outsiders, so everything is fine. Former FTC investigators disagree and believe Facebook is doing an end run around the FTC ruling. While Facebook says all of this was legal, the company also says it's already started shutting down these agreements since the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So far, they say they've shut down 22 separate data sharing agreements. So, what can you do about it? Not much if you keep using Facebook. You could try to avoid apps that integrate with Facebook and hope that the company ends the rest of its agreements. Otherwise, it's hard to see how you keep your info from being shared by Facebook. If you want to leave Facebook, episode 81 of the checklist will tell you how to get started.
Hey, you guys want to go for a bonus round? I mean,
Sure.
Okay, excellent. Because since we prepared this show, honestly, probably since we started recording this show, but since we prepared this show, there's been news of another Facebook privacy issue. The good news this time, it was relatively small compared to stories like the Cambridge Analytica story. And the other good news is it was an accident, which somehow feels better. It's not really, but it feels like it.
Yeah, instead of the leaks and data breaches where you have a hacker making off with personal information, this was a leak that involved users posting the information themselves. Now, the way Facebook normally works, a user can choose what audience to target for a given post that they make on the site. So a user could choose to post something publicly for anyone in the world to see, but most of the time users only want their friends to be able to see what they post. At least that's the way it's supposed to work. A recent software bug on Facebook servers made it so that users who thought they were posting friends-only posts were actually making public posts. This bug was live for 10 days in May and affected as many as 14 million Facebook users. The bug changed the audience for some users' posts to public without any warning to the user. And since the audience setting is sticky, that is, it stays at whatever you set it to for subsequent posts, users affected by the bug might have been totally unaware that they were posting publicly for the duration the bug was live. Facebook has started notifying users who are affected by the bug, and if you are one of those unlucky 14 million users, you'll be seeing a notification appear in your feed from Facebook recommending that you review the audience for your recent posts.
Hey man, accidents happen. That's what I tell my kids all the time.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear that they're not just evil, they're also inept. Sorry, that's really unfair. That's really unfair.
That's mean, man.
Alive. Well, no, I mean, as you say, we all make mistakes, but boy, howdy. And then here's the thing. So Facebook's like, yeah, listen, we accidentally turned your stuff from private to public. You're never going to be able to have your friend unsee the thing that you didn't want that person to see. And by the way, you might want to go back and fix what we broke. I mean, that's just... Well,
they fixed it right, but they want you to...
The problem is you can't tell if somebody intentionally was posting something publicly.
Yeah, I get
maybe you did want to, maybe you did want to tell off your entire company or something like that publicly, go in a blaze of glory. But maybe you meant to just post that to your friends. Facebook doesn't really know. They're not going to judge. So that was the problem there, is they can't just go back and say, oh, oops, we think you meant this was private, we'll make it private. They don't know. So yeah, it's up to the users to review, 10 days worth of posts. And if you're a frequent poster on Facebook, that might be a problem.
Yeah, or if you're a frequent...
I mean, and as you said, it's way too late now. People will have seen those posts.
Whoopsie.
Either way.
Right, because your HR manager is going to be like, oh, okay, so you didn't mean to say this about your boss. Oh, well, then fine. Don't worry about it. I'm sure it's okay that you didn't mean for everybody to know. As is always the case, we've just really kind of started on these stories. I mean, it was a lot, and yet it was not everything that we've got. If you'd like to know more about all of it, links are available in one place. That is our website, securemac.com/checklist. We referenced episode 81 earlier, which I think is when the Cambridge Analytica story broke. Episode 85 was more Facebook follies. You can find notes for those shows and every other show that we've done at securemac.com/checklist. And links to play the show right there as well. So full service and taking none of your data, as far as I know.
Except if they like our page.
Well, that's
and
right.
They could share it with their friends,
yes,
too, right?
And the good people at BlackBerry Hub, apparently. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.